I remember the road stretching endlessly beneath the pale glow of the moon, the kind of night that presses silence into your chest and makes every shadow feel alive. The motel sat at the edge of a forgotten highway, its neon sign flickering in rhythmic pulses, casting strange, trembling light across the empty parking lot. Inside, the air was heavy and still, carrying a faint hum that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I set my bag down and noticed the curtains moving, though the windows were closed. A chill ran along my spine, and in the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to thicken, stretching and shifting as if watching. Every sound, the humming of the fridge, the creak of the floor, felt magnified, almost like a warning. I tried to ignore it, but then the shadows moved, deliberately, unnaturally, inching closer to the bed. That's when I saw it. Two dark shapes at the edge of the room, impossible to find, yet unmistakably aware of me. I never should have opened the door. The highway was nearly empty. Fog pressed against the asphalt like wet cloth. I could see the neon sign, flickering pale light through the mist. The motel loomed quietly. Its walls sagged under the weight of years. A hum of electricity from a single faulty bulb buzzed somewhere near the entrance. I parked and stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, sharp under the hush of night. Air was thick, damp, carrying the faint smell of something burned and wet. The lobby was still. A single fluorescent light buzzed above the desk. Plastic chairs sat like forgotten ghosts along the far wall. The clerk didn't look up. Only his hands moved over papers, rustling softly. I caught the faint metallic tang of coffee lingering in the air, bitter and cold. I signed the register. The pen's tip scraped against the paper. My own breath seemed louder than anything else. Room 12. I took the key and walked down the hall. The carpet muffled my steps, yet every small squeak felt amplified. The door was cold to touch. Inside, the room smelled faintly of mothballs and damp linen. The bed sagged in the middle, as if holding memories I wasn't meant to see. The window faced a highway. Fog swirled around the neon, turning the light into something unreal, pale and flickering. It made the shadows of the curtains stretch across the floor like long fingers. I sat on the edge of the bed. The hum from the neon mixed with the buzz of the light above. I realized the room was too quiet to be empty. There was a rustle behind the curtains, a soft, slow shifting. I told myself it was a wind, but the air outside was still. I approached the window. My fingertips brushed the glass. It was cold and damp. Shapes moved in the fog, pale and indistinct, but they weren't entirely outside. I stepped back. The hum seemed closer now, vibrating under the skin. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in the silence. The old radio on the nightstand caught my attention. It was off, yet I felt the static before I saw it. A low, almost imperceptible whisper tickled the edges of my hearing. I listened. The whispers didn't form words, just tones, like someone breathing softly through a pillow. The hair on my arm stood up, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away from the window. The fog thickened. The neon's flicker stretched shadows into shapes that crouched at the edge of vision. They weren't moving, and yet I felt them shift when I blinked. I lay on the bed, eyes open. The ceiling fan creaked above, slow and uneven. Every few minutes, a soft thump echoed from the walls, like something settling into the corners. I smelled the mattress, damp and faintly metallic. It mixed with a lingering scent of coffee and old wax. I tried to breathe normally, but the air felt sticky in my lungs. Time slowed. Every second stretched long and uneven, like the neon outside. I wanted to close my eyes, but the feeling of being watched pinned me to the bed. Soft footsteps drifted from the hallway. Not hurried, not urgent, just deliberate. I waited. The footsteps stopped, then retreated. I exhaled slowly. The whispering of the radio faded. The neon outside stuttered one last time. And then it was just me, the fog, and the motel. Sleep hovered, fragile and distant. I could feel it pulling, like water over rocks. Yet the silence was too loud, the shadows too alive. Finally, I closed my eyes. The fog pressed against the glass, the neon bleeding into the room. And I understood that even alone I wasn't. The hall was narrow. Dim light spilled from the corner, pale and unsteady. I could feel the floor tremble ever so slightly, under my feet. The hum started there. Low, constant, not loud enough to hurt, but it wrapped around me, curling into the edges of my thoughts. I pressed my hand to the wall. Cold, smooth. It pulsed beneath my fingers, almost like the building was breathing. Or maybe it was me. Shadows pooled in corners where light shouldn't reach. They weren't shapes of furniture. Not quite. They moved with a life of their own, stretching, collapsing as if listening. I stepped forward. The hum grew layered now, a vibration I could feel in my chest. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old paper. My lungs drew it in heavy and hesitant. A door hung slightly ajar. The room beyond was darker than the hall, yet the hum was stronger there. I leaned closer, saw footsteps, my own, seemed to echo back at me in the walls. I wanted to turn back, but curiosity, soft and nagging, pulled me in. The floor beneath me shifted again, a subtle quake, a whisper under soles. I breathed, shallow, tasting the rust in the air. Inside, the walls were lined with panels I hadn't noticed before. They hummed individually, a subtle discord beneath the main tone. Each panel was warm to the touch, vibrating under my fingertips. I traced one slowly, feeling the energy pulse like it had a memory of its own. The shadows here were heavier. They pulled at my ankles, climbing slowly up the walls, licking corners and sealing edges. The light seemed dimmer somehow, though I hadn't moved the bulb. My eyes burned from the strain of looking. I thought I heard a breath, or maybe it was a hum, twisting itself into something human. It came from the far wall, where nothing was. I held my hand up, trembling, and the hum responded, swelling like it noticed me. There was a small vent near the floor. From it, a cold draft swept out. It carried the scent of metal, of machinery long unused. I crouched closer. The hum seeped from there, like it had been waiting, trapped beneath layers of wall and paint. A flicker of movement in the corner, a shadow thinner, taller than any furniture. It didn't approach. It just observed. I froze. The hum softened then, almost shyly. It vibrated against my teeth and my skull and the soles of my feet. I imagined it forming shapes in the air. I imagined hands pressing against the other side of the wall, tracing patterns I couldn't see. The door I came through groaned. I thought of leaving, and yet something held me, a thread of curiosity, winding through my chest, tying me to the pulse of the room. The shadows shifted again. I blinked, and one seemed to vanish entirely. The hum steadied, a low heartbeat under everything. I closed my eyes, felt it travel through me. When I opened them, the room seemed lighter, but not in a comforting way. The shadows were thinner, the hum quieter. It was waiting, patient. I stepped back toward the hall. The hum followed, fading slowly as I retreated. The floor no longer quivered beneath me. The air smelled less of rust and damp, more neutral, but still cold. I didn't speak. I didn't look back. But I could feel it in the silence, in the slight tremor underfoot, in the empty spaces where shadows once clung. The humming room was still there, alive, patient, listening. And I knew, without looking, that it would remember me. The window was pale in the half-light. Outside, the street was empty. Inside, the curtains swayed. I didn't remember opening a window. No breeze moved through the room. Still, the fabric rippled, soft and deliberate. I sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers traced a quilt, rough under my touch. A smell, faint and cold, drifted from the corners of the room. Something watched. Not a shape, not a figure. Just a feeling, creeping along my spine. The curtains danced again, slower this time. The hem lifted, almost whispering against the floor. I could hear it, almost sighing. My heartbeat echoed in the quiet. Each thump a warning. Each thump a plea to move, to look away. I dared to glance. The shadows in the corner stretched, longer than they should. They moved with the curtains, curling toward the floor like smoke. I held my breath. The air grew heavy. Every inhale tasted like metal, sharp and bitter. A soft rustle from the other side of the room. I froze. Nothing appeared, but the sound lingered, hollow and deliberate. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just fabric. Just light. Just tired eyes. But the curtains continued, swaying like they had intent. Each movement matched the rhythm of my chest. I felt small in the vastness of the room. The corners seemed darker now, as if they had swallowed the walls. A shadow flickered near the window. Not human, not animal, just presence. I reached toward the curtain, slow, cautious. The fabric shivered under my fingers, cold and alive. It clung to me, sticky in some way I couldn't understand. I stepped back. The swaying slowed. The room returned to its shallow, quiet normalcy, but the feeling remained. A weight pressing from just behind the curtains. Watching, waiting. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn the light on, but my legs refused. Minutes passed. Hours could have passed. Time had no shape in that quiet. The curtains finally stilled. The room smelled faintly of dust and cold. I exhaled shallow, aware of every small noise, the creak of the floor, the hum of the heater, my own breath. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just waited. The window remained dark. The night remained still. And yet, I knew the eyes never left. The curtains were calm now, but something inside me had shifted. I was not alone. Not ever. Not while they lingered behind the thin fabric. The night was thick with fog. Street lamps stretched pale fingers across the wet asphalt. My apartment window pressed cold against my back as I watched. Something moved. Not in the street, not the neighbors' shadows. Closer, in the corner of the room, where the light barely reached. I first thought it was a trick of the reflection, a coat on a chair, but the shape twisted, elongated. It didn't have a source. No lamp, no candle, nothing that could cast it. It lingered there, pale and silent, like breath that shouldn't be. I blinked once, twice. It stretched, pulled upward like smoke, then sank low again, each movement unnatural. I froze, trying to listen. No hum from the city, no traffic, only the faint rustle of air brushing the curtain. Or maybe it was breathing. My chest tightened. The corners of the room felt smaller, the air thicker. Every shadow seemed sharper, more deliberate. I moved my hand. The floor was cold beneath my fingertips. I pressed against the wall, hoping it would pass. It didn't. The shadow shifted again, this time toward the center. A slow, crawling motion, like water over stone. It didn't obey the angles of the ceiling, the furniture. It flowed against them. I tried to convince myself it was imagination. The apartment was old. Floorboards creaked. Air vents sighed. But this didn't belong to the house. It lingered in silence, a presence that weighed more than air, more than fear. I could feel in my bones. A faint vibration under the floorboards, as if the room itself was responding. The window rattled. A distant hum under the fog. I didn't dare look away. Every time I blinked, it flickered, just beyond my vision. My reflection in the glass grew pale. The shadow elongated behind me. I tried to step back. Something followed, stretching impossibly long across the wall. A draft brushed my neck, rustling faint like cloth dragged across stone. I didn't move. I couldn't. It paused, waiting, I think, or maybe observing. I held my breath. The clock ticked somewhere far off. But the shadow, it moved without rhythm. Slow, patient, not quite human. I reached for the lamp, fingers trembling. The switch clicked, but nothing changed. The shadow absorbed the light, or the light recoiled. I couldn't tell. Silence stretched. Thicker now. The fog outside pressed closer, like it was peering in through the glass. I touched the corner. Cold, smooth, nothing. And yet I knew it was there. It twisted again. A subtle sway, like a candle in windless air. I imagined whispers, soft, so faint I wasn't sure if I heard them or thought them. The night deepened, every sound muffled under its presence. I could feel the weight of it, a shadow not bound by walls, not by logic. Finally it receded, not gone, just waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't dare. Morning came pale and thin. Sunlight touched the floorboards. The corner looked empty. But I knew better. I knew it would return. The air was damp that night. A thin fog curled under the streetlight outside my window. I could see it through the glass, pale and trembling. I had been sitting at my desk, alone. The lamp cast a small circle of light. Everything else around me seemed to sink into shadow. Then I heard it, soft at first, almost like the wind brushing against the walls. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, whispering my name. I froze. The syllables stretched, dragging themselves across the corners of the room. A gentle, hissing echo that seemed to crawl beneath my skin. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the night. Yet every time I blinked, the whisper came again. This time a little closer, a little sharper. I turned slowly. The corners of the room were gray with shadow. The hum of the heater filled the silence, but the whisper threaded through it. It repeated, my name. I tried to locate it, under the desk, behind the curtains, even in the closet, but the room remained empty. The whisper didn't stop. It moved, sometimes soft, almost affectionate, other times cold, distant, as if it were watching me from another place entirely. I could feel it crawling along the floorboards, a vibration under my bare feet. My pulse matched it, trembling and uneven. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, like rusted hinges. I sat down again, hoping if I didn't move, it might fade. It didn't. It circled me, a soft, persistent voice threading through the quiet. I thought I glimpsed shapes in the corners, flickers of shadow, pale and hesitant. They dissolved when I looked directly, yet the whisper remained. My name. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt as if it were stretching and bending, like a reflection in dark water. I stopped watching the corners, stopped trying to trace it, but I could not stop listening. It had settled in the air itself. Every breath I drew carried it, a vibration in my chest, a breath I could not expel. I imagined it might have been a trick of memory. I whispered my own name back, almost involuntarily. The room answered, a soft repeat, as if my own voice had split and become someone else. The walls seemed to lean closer. The lamp flickered. Cold touched the back of my neck. I shivered. I wanted to leave, but my body was heavy, anchored, as if the whisper had grown roots inside me. It circled one last time, soft, tender, then still. I sat in silence. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the window. The lamp hummed quietly, shadows pooling in the corners. And my name, once loud and impossible to ignore, faded into nothing. I could still feel it there, a hollow echo under my ribs, a promise of return. I breathed slowly. The air smelled of dust and rain. The room was empty, yet I was not alone. The room smelled faintly of old paper and cold air. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves against the window pane. It was evening, though the pale light lingered, stretching long shadows across the floor. I noticed it first on the desk. A pen, once neatly aligned with the edge, now lay at an angle, pointing toward the corner I never looked at. I thought I had moved it absent-mindedly, but my memory insisted otherwise. The drawer beside it shifted slightly, too. Its handle tilted just enough to catch the dim light, gleaming like it had been disturbed. I froze. My fingers itched to touch it to confirm, but I resisted. Footsteps whispered somewhere far off. Or maybe it was my own heart, thumping against the quiet. A low hum hovered beneath the ceiling, almost like the room was breathing. A small figurine on the shelf, one I had arranged carefully, now faced the opposite wall. The eyes, painted dark, seemed to follow me, reflecting the waning light. I blinked. It was as if they had shifted just slightly, enough to notice, enough to unsettle. I told myself it was nothing. The wind, perhaps. A careless brush in my sleeve. But the books I stacked by the bed, their spines formed a crooked line, as if some invisible hand had rearranged them while I slept. The air thickened. I could hear my own breath, shallow, uneven. Each inhale scraped against my chest like paper being torn. On the floor, a pair of keys rested where I had left them yesterday. Now, they were near the doorway, cold metal pressed against the threadbare rug. I reached down. My fingers trembled as I picked them up. The weight felt familiar, yet wrong. A shadow passed across the far wall. Not my own, and too smooth, too fluid to belong to anything human. I waited. It didn't move again. The pen caught my eye again. It had shifted more now, pointing at the drawer handle. I didn't want to look inside, but curiosity, quiet, insistent, tugged at me. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, but the air smelled different, tinged with something sharp and metallic. I pulled back, heart hammering, convinced the objects themselves were watching. A soft rustle came from the corner, where the figurine had been staring. I dared a glance. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its presence pressing against the edges of my vision. I moved to the window, hoping the fog outside would ground me. The streetlights cast pale pools on the sidewalk, each shadow trembling in the breeze. Inside, the room felt smaller, the objects alive in their silence. The hum under the ceiling deepened. Not a machine, not wind, something quieter, watching. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers brushing the fabric. Even that felt altered, as if the texture remembered more than it should. The figurine still stared. The pen still pointed. Even the keys seemed to vibrate faintly in my palm. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe normally. The silence wrapped around me, thick and expectant. When I opened them, everything looked the same. Yet, somehow, nothing was where it belonged. I left the room quietly as the sun disappeared completely. The objects waited. Alone, I realized they had been moving all along, just beyond the edge of attention, just beyond sleep. And they would not stop. The door clicked shut behind me. The air fell still again. But I knew the room was alive in its quiet way, counting every step I took, every breath I drew, every pause of my heartbeat. I did not look back. The air was heavy that night. Fog pressed against the windows, damp and cold. I could see my breath curling faintly in the pale light of the hallway lamp. The mirror leaned against the wall, just past the doorway. Its surface caught the light in an odd way, glinting, almost aware. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't stop. My reflection stared back. I lifted a hand. The shadow in the glass lifted too, but slower, delayed. A soft scrape came from the floorboard behind me. I froze, feeling the vibration through the soles of my feet. The mirror flickered, and my reflection blinked once, twice, too late. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of rust and something colder, something wet. The shadow didn't follow exactly. It stretched like smoke curling in ways my body couldn't. The hum of the old heater filled the room. Or maybe it wasn't the heater. The shadow in the mirror pulsed with it, almost breathing, almost alive. I reached out. My fingers grazed the glass. It was warmer than the air, smoother than my skin. And for a moment, I thought it might move toward me. The reflection behind me, my own, paused, then tilted its head. But I had not. The space between us was small. Too small. I heard soft footsteps behind me again, slower now. I spun, but the hallway was empty. Only the mirror remained. The shadow in it smiled, just the corner of its mouth, and I felt the air tighten around my chest. I whispered my own name. It whispered back, but not quite right. Not quite me. I backed away. The floor creaked under my weight. The hum became sharper, higher, like fingernails across the edge of glass. I blinked. The mirror's surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a stone. The shadow reached out, and so did I simultaneously. But our hands never touched. A shiver ran down my spine. The room grew colder, the fog thicker. My reflection froze in mid-step. The shadow moved. I turned away, gripping my own arms. The silence that followed was heavier than the fog. I could feel it pressing into my ears, wrapping around my ribcage, pulling me toward the glass. I heard my name again. It was soft, almost a sigh. I whispered back. Nothing. I edged closer, compelled by something I didn't understand. The mirror waited. The shadow waited. Even the fog seemed still, as if the room itself held its breath. I touched the glass one last time. The cold bit into my palm. The shadow leaned in closer, perfectly in sync now. Our faces mirrored each other too well, too sharply, too wrong. Then it stopped. Everything stopped. The hum vanished. The fog thinned. Even my own heartbeat seemed distant. I stepped back. The mirror hung there, silent and pale. The shadow still lingered, but only if I looked. If I turned away, it melted into the glass, waiting. I left the room slowly. The hallway smelled faintly of rust and cold air, and the mirror behind me continued to watch. I don't know if it waits for me, or if it waits for someone else. The hall was dim, stretched in the pale glow of a single flickering bulb. Outside my door, the air held a chill that made my skin crawl. I could hear the floorboards sighing, as if the house itself were breathing. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, soft, but echoing, too, impossibly loud in the empty corridor. I pressed my back against the door, fingertips grazing the wood. The hush in the room pressed close, thicker than the night air, thick with dust and something faintly metallic. My breath came shallow, caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. They moved again. A shuffle, a tap, a weight shifting across the floor. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Old houses made noises. Old houses moaned. But it wasn't the house. I strained to listen, catching every hollow creak, every tiny scrape of the sole against the wood. They paused, right outside the door. The silence that followed pressed against me, like water, like fog. I thought I saw a shadow through the sliver under the door. It was pale, slow, stretching just enough to reach the light. Then gone. The footsteps started again. Down the hall, away from me, then back. A rhythm, a soft, mocking pattern, impossible to ignore. I could smell it then. Something cold and wet, like iron, but not quite. I swallowed, heart ticking faster than the seconds. Each step seemed to scrape the floor with purpose, deliberate, as if someone knew exactly where I was. I tried to steady my hands, resting them on the thin blanket I had pulled over me. The fabric smelled of old laundry and dust, but it grounded me for a moment before the footsteps stopped. Silence, absolute, and then the creak of the doorframe, a shift in the air, a soft draft curling around my ankle. I wanted to call out, but my voice was trapped behind my teeth, swallowed by the shadows. I could hear the faintest brush of movement, a scraping, almost imperceptible, across the floorboard behind the hallway corner. It was closer now, closer than it should be. I closed my eyes, counting the slow, uneven breaths that echoed in my own ears. The smell of something metallic hung heavier. The fog in the hall seemed to creep in under the door, pale and pressing, curling around my legs. Then nothing. No steps, no sound, no shift in the air. Just the hum of the house settling, or so I told myself. I lay there, listening for any hint of the footsteps returning, but the hall stayed empty. When I finally dared to look, the door was just as it had been. Still, pale light from the bulb, slicing the shadows, thin and hesitant. No footprints, no shadow, nothing, only the faint, lingering echo of steps I never saw, and the soft, impossible weight of someone or something still waiting just beyond the threshold. I stayed awake until the first hint of morning, fingers tight around the blanket, listening. The hall remained silent, but I knew they would come back tonight. The kitchen was empty. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, pale and still. I could feel it even before I saw it, the way the air thickened. The light above me shivered. A single bulb, old, trembling like it remembered something it shouldn't. Shadows bent across the walls, long fingers stretching, curling into corners I hadn't noticed before. I tried to focus on the counter. A mug sat there, half full, abandoned. Its surface shimmered with a reflection that wasn't mine. The bulb stuttered again. A pause in the glow made the room colder, sharper. I could hear my own breath. Too loud, too quick. Something moved. Or maybe the shadows did. They slipped across the ceiling, undulating, slow. I reached out, hand hovering above the table. Nothing. Just a chill pressing into my skin. The light flickered faster now. I thought I saw a face in the kitchen doorway. Pale, almost translucent. It didn't move, except for the way it shimmered with the flicker. Each pulse of light made it closer, though I hadn't stepped forward. I blinked. The figure dissolved into shadows. The hum of electricity filled my ears, a soft vibration in the walls. It didn't feel like a light. It felt like a warning. I stepped back. The floor was cold, wooden under my feet, sticky somehow, though nothing was there. The bulb shuddered again, and the shadows stretched longer, wrapping around the edges of the room. I wanted to leave. My fingers traced the doorframe, but the door was farther than it should have been, distorted, as if the walls were breathing. The shadows crawled across the ceiling now, meeting in the corners, forming shapes that weren't shapes. They whispered almost inaudibly, just on the edge of hearing. I froze. The silence that followed pressed down on me like a hand. The bulb flashed one last time. The room was empty again, quiet, normal almost, but the smell lingered. Ozone metal, a faint rot behind the fridge. I couldn't move. The shadows lingered in my mind, stretched into the corners of my vision. Every flicker would bring them back. I pressed my palm against the wall. It was warm, then cold, then warm again. I sat down on the floor, back against the fridge. The light pulsed gently now, slow, hesitant, like it was watching me. I could feel it crawling across my skin, through my hair, into the quiet between my thoughts. The ceiling seemed too close. The walls seemed to breathe. I tried to tell myself it was only a bulb, only a shadow, but I could hear them in the flicker. Soft footsteps, almost my own, passed behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The light steadied. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The mug sat on the counter. The fog pressed against the glass. The hum had faded. Then, almost imperceptibly, the bulb shivered again. And I remembered that some things never stopped watching. I stayed on the floor, waiting, breathing, alone with the shadows that only I could see. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of the radiator. The walls seemed colder than usual. I could feel it before I saw it. A pause in the air, a chill sliding down my spine. I thought I imagined it. Then a breath, not mine, cold, uneven, brushing the back of my neck. I froze. The room remained empty. Shadows pooled in the corners, curling like smoke. The wooden floorboards creaked softly beneath my own feet, or maybe beneath someone else's. I didn't dare turn. The lamp flickered. A pale light shivered across the ceiling. For a moment, the walls leaned closer. The smell of damp and dust filled the air. I could almost taste it, metallic and sharp. The breath came again, slower this time, deliberate. I pressed my back to the wall. Each exhale of my own lungs seemed deafening. Each heartbeat thundered in my ears. The darkness beyond the hallway felt heavier than air. I could hear it move. No footsteps, no voice, only presence. It hovered near, just beyond sight. A drawer rattled upstairs. Or maybe below. I couldn't place it, and yet I knew it had moved. The walls pulsed with quiet static. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, thin, stretching fingers. I wanted to breathe, but my lungs wouldn't obey. A soft rustling came from the corner of the room. Closer, always closer. I tried to step forward. My foot met nothing solid, only floor, only air, only tension. I felt it then, the brush again on the nape of my neck, colder than ice. I whispered, even though no one could hear. Just air, just walls. The words caught my throat. The lamp swung, just a hair's breadth, spilling more shadow than light. Something paused behind it. I dared not blink. My hand reached out to touch the wall. Rough paint, cold, real. Yet the hair on my arm stood, as if brushed by invisible fingers. The silence returned. A thin, stretched silence that made my ears hum. But I knew it hadn't gone. A drawer upstairs opened and closed again. Soft, quick. The sound barely registered, but my body flinched. The breath, there it was again, warm against my ear now, faintly humid. I shivered despite the cold. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs refused. I counted the seconds, but the seconds were wrong. They stretched and broke, folding over themselves. I wasn't alone. I whispered my own name, almost to check reality. It answered with nothing. Just another pause, heavier than before. The floor creaked one last time. Or maybe it hadn't moved at all. I couldn't tell where the presence began and the shadows ended. I sank to the floor, hands on my knees, eyes on the lamp swinging gently, shadows pooling like ink. The breath stopped. Or maybe it never had. I stayed there, listening to my own uneven breathing, pretending it was mine alone. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A branch tapped the window. I felt it, too, in my chest, where the shadows waited. I closed my eyes. The dark pressed closer, soft as a whisper, patient as a breath. And I stayed, waiting for it to leave, though I knew it never would. The room was small. Evening light draped across the walls, pale and trembling. I noticed first the corners. At the far end, near the old wardrobe, a shadow waited. Still, silent, almost too dark to be anything at all. I blinked. It seemed to shift, not like a person moving, more like a shadow stretching, pulling at the edges of the room. I turned my gaze to the opposite corner. Another shape lingered there, thin, dark, watching. I felt the air thicken, heavy with something I couldn't name. The floorboards hung beneath my weight. Every step made the figure stretch, recoil, as if noticing me. I froze, holding my breath, hoping they would not notice me noticing them. The room smelled faintly of old paper and damp wood. I could feel the cool edge of the wall against my fingertips as I edged closer. The shadows didn't retreat. They waited. Patient. I thought I saw one lean forward. Just a hint of movement. A twitch at the corner of its darkness. But when I blinked, it was still, perfectly still. Soft footsteps whispered in my ears, though I was the only one moving. Each sound seemed amplified, bouncing off the corners, weaving between the figures. I could feel the weight of their presence in the spaces they didn't occupy. Cold, heavy, watching. The light shifted. A thin line from the window touched the floor. One figure stretched into it, elongated, impossibly thin. The other recoiled, melting back into shadow. A quiet static seemed to hum through the room, a vibration I could feel in my chest. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my voice would not come. The silence pressed into me, thick and patient. Every breath I drew seemed to echo between the walls, drawing attention. I could hear them in the movement of the air, a faint rustle, like fabric brushing the floor. Or perhaps it was just my imagination. I wanted it to be. I stepped closer to the first corner. The shadow pulsed. I could almost see the shape of a face, pale, elongated, watching. A soft hum vibrated through the wood beneath me. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't step back either. The second figure shifted too, a slow tilt, almost human. I realized then that they only moved when I looked away. When I dared to blink, just for a moment, they shifted slightly closer, curling around the room. I leaned against the wall, feeling the cool plaster under my hand. The shadows stayed, holding their corners like guardians of some forgotten space. I could smell the faint metallic tang of something old, hidden, waiting. I closed my eyes, listening. Even when I stopped moving, the room seemed to breathe around me. Soft footsteps, soft hums, a distant scraping of the floor. I imagined them leaning closer, whispering, stretching across the corners of my vision. When I opened my eyes, they were gone, or maybe they had never moved. The corners were empty, yet full. The air was thick with presence, dense and patient. I left the room slowly. The door creaked. The shadows did not follow, not outward, but I knew they lingered, in the corner of my mind, in the corners of rooms I would never enter alone again, waiting, always waiting. The apartment smelled faintly of rain and wet concrete. Neon from the street spilled to the blinds, cutting the darkness into jagged stripes. I was alone. At first, I thought it was the pipes. A soft tapping, distant, steady, but it didn't match the hum of water. I pressed my ear to the wall. Tap, pause, tap. It was deliberate, almost like a rhythm. Outside, the neon flickered. A pale light stuttered across the room. With each flicker, the tapping seemed to line up perfectly, as though it were watching the street, waiting for the pulse of the city. I tried to ignore it, focus on the faint smell of wet asphalt creeping through the vents. The tapping continued, steady, patient. The floorboards beneath me groaned. I could feel a slight vibration with each tap, almost like a heartbeat beneath the walls. A soft shiver ran down my spine. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, constricted. I reached for my phone. The screen's glow was weak against the neon bleed. Tap, pause, tap. I counted. Each strike, was exactly 3 seconds apart. Too precise for pipes. Too deliberate for rats. I sat on the couch, holding my knees. The rhythm became almost hypnotic. The room breathed with it. I could smell the faint tang of electricity. Or maybe it was fear. Then the tapping shifted. Softer. Closer. It sounded like it was moving along the wall toward me. I held my breath. Felt the air thicken. I whispered into the quiet. No response. Only the taps, now irregular, teasing, almost playful. The neon outside flickered faster. The shadows stretched, shrank, danced across the ceiling. I wanted to leave, but my legs were heavy, my chest tight. The tapping was all I could hear. It was inside me now, echoing in my bones. A window rattled. A curtain swayed without wind. I blinked, and for a moment, the wall seemed to breathe along with the tapping, like it had a presence, a soft, waiting presence. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, smooth, no cracks, no drafts, just a rhythm. Tap, pause, tap. The neon light stuttered again, and in that flicker, I thought I saw a movement. A shadow behind the wall, pale and slow, then gone. The tapping slowed. Or maybe I was holding my breath too long. A silence settled, heavy, tactile. I could feel it in my ears, my throat, in the damp corners of the apartment. I leaned back against the couch, tried to steady my shaking hands. The street below whispered in neon and wet tires. And then, as if exhausted, the tapping faded. Soft now, distant like a memory. I didn't move. The pale light stuttered once more, then held. The apartment smelled of rain again, and though the tapping had stopped, I could still feel it, tapping gently in the walls. And somewhere deep inside me, the hallway was pale in the early morning light. Winter had left the air thin and cold. Pressing against my skin through the cracked window, I could hear the faint hum of the heater trying to wake itself. The door at the end of the hall, it moved, a slow tilt, almost imperceptible. I had locked it the night before. I had checked it twice. The creak came first, long, hesitant, stretching across the wooden floor like someone was testing the silence. I froze. The air felt heavier, carrying the faint smell of damp wood. A shadow flickered behind the frame, just for a moment, and then nothing. I told myself it was the light or the wind through the old house, but the door, it was still, except for the faint, almost imperceptible shift. I stepped closer, my bare feet pressing into the cold floor. Each step echoed in the quiet hallway. The hum of the heater stuttered, like it was holding its breath. The handle, it rattled, softly, a tiny movement, but deliberate. And then the door leaned further, inching into the room as though the shadow itself was pushing it. I reached for it, hand trembling. The wood was cold, slick with some strange dampness. I could smell it now, iron like blood mixed with dust. Then silence, just my own breath, shallow and quick, filling the space. The door didn't move. The shadow didn't come forward. I tried to pull back, but something inside me didn't let me leave. I could feel it waiting just beyond the edge of light, a soft rustle, like fabric brushing the floor. My eyes followed every movement, every flicker of the pale morning light. It seemed alive, dancing along the edges of the walls, stretching toward me. I wanted to close the door. I wanted to lock it again, but the lock felt different now, heavy, resistant, as if it had forgotten its purpose. A whispering sound drifted from the frame, soft, almost like the room itself was breathing. I could feel the shadow pressing against the wood. Leaning into the gap I had left open, my hand hovered above the handle. I could hear the wood groaning under some invisible weight. A long pause, and then a shiver of movement ran along the floorboards. The shadow stretched farther, curling against the walls like smoke. It was patient. I was aware of my own heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing in the hollow air. I stepped back. The floor chilled my toes, rising up to my ankles. The door creaked again, slower this time. Deliberate, measured, waiting. A faint scent of wet earth seeped from the crack. It was heavy, almost sickly, curling into the back of my throat. I wanted to run. I wanted to shut my eyes. But I couldn't move. And then it stopped, The door leaned there, silent, as though it had forgotten how to move. The shadow paused. The hallway returned to its pale, indifferent light. I leaned against the wall, breath shallow, hand shaking. The hum of the heater resumed, timid, like a small apology. Outside, a crow called. I don't know how long I stood there. The door didn't move again. The shadow didn't come forward. But I knew it was still there, just beyond the edges of light, just outside my reach, waiting in the quiet, patient. And when I finally left the hallway, the door was closed, but the creak lingered in my ears, soft, slow, like a whisper I could never quite forget. The air was damp tonight. The parking lot outside my window gleamed pale, almost unreal. Shadows stretched and twisted across the room, long and silent. I pressed my hand to glass. Cold seeped in, but I didn't pull away. The glow pulsed softly, like it was breathing. Cars sat empty, black shapes in the light. Every surface shimmered faintly, slick with rain or frost. I couldn't tell. A rustling behind me made me turn. Nothing, just the silence of the room. The glow shifted. It slid along the asphalt, pooling beneath a lamppost that had never worked before. I blinked. The edges seemed wrong, soft, like they didn't belong to the world I knew. My breath fogged the window. I traced a finger through it. The shape in the lot didn't respond. It just waited, saw footsteps echoed outside. Too careful, too even. I froze. The glow reflected in the glass, pale and wavering, painting my face a strange, cold color. A car door opened far away, then closed. No one moved. No sound followed. I leaned closer, heart slow, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the shadows were moving differently now. They weren't just cast. They were stretching, curling toward me. I could smell the damp asphalt, cold and metallic, rising through the cracked window. A faint hum lingered, almost like it was coming from the lot itself. I didn't recognize it. It was soft, insistent, like a voice I had almost forgotten. The pale light wavered. I imagined shapes forming, figures bending low over the cars. Then gone. Only shadows left, stretched too long, as if they had decided to stay. I wanted to close the blinds, wanted to shut the night out. My fingers trembled, but curiosity, it held me there, pressed against the glass, hearing the static whisper in the hum of the glow. I thought I saw movement behind the lamppost. Slow, careful, almost human. Then nothing, just the parking lot, empty, perfectly still, yet wrong. A soft breeze stirred the curtains. I smelled the damp air more sharply now, like it carried voices I couldn't quite hear. I pressed my cheek to window. The glass was colder than before. Something shifted in the corner of the lot. A reflection? A shadow? I couldn't tell. It was pale, and it moved with the rhythm of the glow. The hum deepened. I held my breath, listening. Each pulse felt like a heartbeat, or maybe mine. The glow dipped suddenly, shadows receding, leaving the lot empty. I blinked, almost relieved. Almost. Then the light returned weaker, flickering. It didn't illuminate the lot now, but the edge of the building. Soft, insistent, waiting. I stepped back. The room felt colder, heavier. The hum lingered. I could feel it under my skin. The glow finally began to fade. Shadows melted back into the ordinary shapes of the room. The hum softened to silence. The lot was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had lingered just out of reach. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. The window creaked. A shadow flickered across the glass. And then nothing. I stayed there, alone, listening to the quiet, to the echo of a glow that had never truly left. The room was cold, though the window was shut tight. Even the pale light of late afternoon seemed tired, spilling across the floor in thin, faded stripes. Dust clung to the edges of the wooden panels, and I could feel it brushing against my skin as I moved. A hum lingered somewhere beneath the walls. It wasn't steady. It wavered, rising and falling like the faint sigh of someone just out of reach. I thought I caught words in it once, but when I listened closer, nothing remained. The corners seemed darker than they should. Shadows pooled there, gathering in angles that made no sense, like they were leaning toward each other. I tried to tell myself it was just the sun fading, but my ears insisted otherwise. A whisper grazed the back of my mind. Soft, almost polite. It wanted to be noticed, but it refused to take shape. Every time I thought I could pin it down, it slipped away, leaving only the space it had touched behind. I stepped closer to the far wall. The floorboard sighed beneath me, sending tremors through my feet. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust, like old blood dried into corners. The whispers followed, brushing my ears in fragments I could never hold. The window creaked. I glanced over, expecting nothing, and yet the curtains shivered as if something leaned close from the other side. I blinked. The motion stopped. The whispers paused. I was alone again, but not really. I moved toward the center of the room, where the light pooled dim and thin. The whispers grew bolder, curling around the edge of hearing, just out of understanding. Sometimes they almost became words, names, questions, fragments of sentences I should know. And then they vanished. The air grew heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. I could feel the corners of the room drawing closer, tightening, patient. Even the shadows seemed to lean, stretching along the floor in strange, unnatural ways. I tried to speak. My voice caught somewhere in my throat. All I managed was a soft exhale. The whispers returned, brushing against it, murmuring just above comprehension. I could feel the floor beneath me subtly shift, as though it were breathing. The walls seemed to pulse, faintly, in rhythm with the murmurs. Each time the words nearly formed, my skin crawled, the hair on my arm stiffening. The room was alive with something that didn't exist, and yet it had been waiting. The corners flickered with motion at the edge of vision. I told myself it was the light changing, the shadows stretching. But my hands, resting on the wooden panels, felt the cold pulse there, rhythmic, patient, like a soft heartbeat. I pulled back, startled. The whispers ebbed for a moment, as if amused. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, breathing shallow. The hum returned, now paired with the whispers, curling around my head, brushing my cheeks, whispering secrets I couldn't grasp. It was almost gentle, almost comforting, and then it reminded me I couldn't stay. The room began to stretch, not in space, but in intent. Every corner seemed to whisper to every other, a quiet network of sighs and fragments. And I was in the center, listening, unable to understand yet unable to leave. Time became irrelevant. The whispers paused for a heartbeat, long enough for me to notice the silence. It pressed in, cold and expectant. Then it returned, a wave of murmurs, delicate, teasing, reaching. I realized I wasn't really in control here. I had entered the room, but the room had entered me. I lay back, eyes on the ceiling, counting the slow rise and fall of shadows. The whispers drifted along the edges, brushing closer, brushing away. Every corner spoke, every shadow leaned. And I could only breathe, listening, suspended in that quiet, endless hum, until the whispers faded to nothing. The room remained, silent, watching, waiting. The room was dim. Night had seeped through the cracks of the blinds, scattering pale lines across the floor. The air smelled faintly of cold linen and something older, almost coppery. I lay still listening. The hum of the heater was uneven tonight, like it was breathing with me. Outside, wind pressed against the glass, soft, insistent. Then I noticed it. A shadow, thin and dark, stretching across the bed. It moved with the slow patience of water, pooling and curling. I blinked. It wasn't there, or at least not the same way. Each time my eyes focused, the edges blurred, dissolved, leaving only the pale indent of something that had been. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, fog from the window, my tired mind. But the mattress dipped just slightly as though it had weight. I held my breath. The room smelled warmer now, like skin under sunlight, damp and strange. I could hear the sheets shift, whispering over the floorboards. My hand trembled. I reached out, but the shadow recoiled, spilling into nothing. It waited, always at the edge of my vision. I wanted to speak, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. The silence had thickness. It pressed against my ears, my chest, filling the space where sound should be. A flicker of light caught the edges of the room. The lamp's glow softened, revealing the outline again, long, thin, stretched. A pale line ran from the corner of the bed toward me, hesitant, deliberate. I tried not to look, but my eyes found it anyway. Every glance made it vanish. Every blink made it gather. It was not just shadow. It was waiting for something I couldn't name. The blankets rustled. Cold air slipped under the sheets, brushing my arm like a finger tracing the length of a bone. I imagined it breathing with me, quietly, patiently. My heart slowed, then sped. The darkness pooled near the pillow, where I had fallen asleep moments before. The soft lines of the bed curved around it, containing it, holding it. I thought of closing my eyes. Maybe then it would stop. Maybe then it would let me be. But when I blinked again, it was there. Longer now, wider, stretching like smoke across the mattress. I felt the brush of something over my ankle, lighter than air, heavier than thought. I whispered, almost without knowing, "Go!" Nothing answered. The air did not shift. The room exhaled slowly, a sigh I could not place. I felt the sheets move, lifting, settling, the shadow moving with them, just beyond my gaze. I lay flat, chest rising and falling, willing myself to be still. It hovered there, stretched across the bed, quiet. It waited for me to look again, but I didn't. I stared at the ceiling instead, where nothing moved. The lines of light from the window softened and the wind faded. Eventually, the edges of the shadow thinned. I could not say when it left. I only knew the weight of its absence, leaving the mattress hollow and cold. The room smelled of linen again, faintly, as if nothing had touched it. I breathed slowly, letting the silence settle. And somewhere behind my eyelids, I could still feel it, waiting, always waiting. The wind pressed against the cracked window, soft but persistent, like a quiet insistence I couldn't ignore. The room smelled of old wood and damp, a fog clinging low to the floor. It was late, though the night didn't feel right, not fully dark, not fully alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The hum of the radiator beneath me filled the space, steady, but somehow wrong. A rustling, soft, delicate, traced along the wall behind me. I shivered, pulling the thin blanket closer. Cold brushed my arm, a sharp, fleeting touch. I froze. No one was there. The shadow in the corner didn't move, but I felt it watching anyway. My skin prickled under a pale wash of streetlight, spilling to the blinds in uneven stripes. Every breath I drew tasted like iron, like something had pressed its fingers to the back of my throat. I shifted, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The cold returned, sliding down my arm this time, fingertips grazing the inside of my wrist. A whisper of movement. I could hear it, soft, almost impatient. The floorboards groaned, not with weight, but with insistence. A single, quiet step, then another, closer. I want to call out. My voice cracked before it left my throat. The air pressed heavier, thick with a presence that wasn't mine. Cold brushed my neck now. Light fingers, tracing the line of my collarbone. My skin rose in goosebumps. I wanted to jerk away, but my body betrayed me, rooted in place. The room seemed smaller, walls leaning in like they were breathing. A low, static hum vibrated through the air, almost musical, almost soothing, but wrong. The shadows pulled into corners, thick and silent. I could feel them, fingers brushing again, this time climbing my arm, lingering at my shoulder. Each touch left a trail, like frost creeping over glass. I smelled something faint, metallic and wet, like blood left in the rain. My eyes darted, catching movement in the reflection of the mirror across the room. Nothing. Nothing at all. The cold pressed again. Not harsh this time. Careful, deliberate teasing. It lingered on my wrist, curling around it, and I thought I could hear it sigh. I closed my eyes. My own heartbeat became loud, uneven, like drums in an empty hall. Beneath the thump of my chest, there was a rhythm, a counter-rhythm, delicate taps, brushing, light footsteps in no direction. The air tasted of dust and something sweet, almost rotting. A pulse of static hummed low, as if something unseen was listening. I imagined the fingers moving, soft and patient, leaving trails across my skin, over and over. I dared not breathe too deeply. The blanket slipped slightly, caught by something cold that was in my hand. A soft pull, a gentle tug at the fabric. The night held its breath with me. The wind outside rose and fell, teasing the window, brushing my face with icy fingertips. Inside, the room stayed still yet heavy, waiting. I opened my eyes. The shadows hadn't moved. The fingers had vanished, or maybe they had just retreated. The chill lingered, like a memory, leaving skin tingling, heart racing, ears tuned to every impossibly small noise. I lay back. The bed sagged beneath me, the air thick and damp. The room smelled faintly of wet iron and quiet despair. And somewhere, just beyond the edges of my awareness, I knew the touch would return. Slowly, I let my eyes drift shut. Cold brushed my arm one last time. I didn't move. The silence hummed around me, and I waited alone. The air was thick tonight. A pale light filtered to the thin curtains, barely touching the worn carpet. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and something I couldn't name. I was alone, though I kept expecting the room to shift, as if it held its breath with me. A quiet hum lingered, low and constant, under the pulse of my own heartbeat. Then it came, a laugh, soft, almost polite, but wrong. It fluttered at the edges of my hearing, like a moth trapped against glass. I froze. My hands were cold, fingers pressing into the carpet. The smell of dust mixed with iron, metallic and sharp, crawled along my tongue. I told myself it was the house. The pipes, the wind, the old floorboard settling. But the laugh, it didn't belong to anything I knew. It paused, stretched, returned lighter this time, almost teasing. I wanted to stand, but the weight of stillness pinned me to the chair. The walls seemed closer now, their shadows deep and hesitant, as though they were listening too. Something brushed my ankle, a soft touch, or maybe a trick of the shadows. The laugh whispered again, just behind my ear, cold, empty, waiting. I could see it then. Not fully. A shimmer, a movement at the corner of the room. It wasn't solid. Not yet, but it bent the light strangely, twisting the edges of the furniture, casting shapes that didn't belong. I blinked. The air felt thicker, almost liquid, pressing against my lungs. Another laugh, short, breathless, a sigh masquerading as amusement. It came from everywhere and nowhere. I tried to speak, to ask it to stop, but my throat was dry, my voice swallowed by the room itself. Only silence answered, a silence so dense it vibrated, humming to the walls, through the floor, through my own trembling chest. I remember the curtains moving, though no breeze dared enter. Soft rustling, like fingers brushing fabric, a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. I kept my eyes locked on the corner, half hoping, half dreading that whatever it was would show itself fully. The laugh returned, slower now, dragging the edges of the room into darkness. It seemed to linger on my skin, a cold caress along my spine. I could smell it then, something like wet stone, or the faint trace of perfume from another time, another life. The light shifted, pale and thin. I thought I saw a face, blurred, leaning from the shadows, but when I blinked, it was gone. Only the room remained, breathing with me, holding its secrets in the corners and under the floorboards. I moved, finally, a small step, a soft shuffle of socks on the carpet. The laugh stopped, abruptly, like someone had pulled a string taut. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. I sat back down, hands clutching the edges of the chair. The corner was empty now, but I could still feel it there, just beyond the veil of light, just beyond the reach of my senses. The hum returned, quieter this time. The room exhaled, and I waited, heart tight, for the laugh to return. But it didn't. The room was colder than it should have been. Pale light from the street slipped through the blinds, broken into jagged lines across the floor. I could feel on my skin tiny prickles, like the air itself was watching. Shadows clung to corners. At first, I thought it was one, then another, then too many to count. They didn't move like people, but like smoke curling in a draft. I tried to blink them away, thinking it was a tiredness, but when I looked again, they multiplied. Something about the edges of my vision seemed alive. The hum from the heater seemed distant, muted. It didn't mask the soft scraping now echoing across the floor. I held my breath, pressed my palm to the wall, cold heart unmoving, but the shadows slid closer anyway. One corner flickered. I swore I saw a shape lean just slightly forward, like it was listening. The smell came next, a damp metallic scent that made my stomach lurch. It wasn't strong enough to identify, but heavy enough to anchor the fear. Each corner had its own pulse, a rhythm almost like breathing, but not mine. I sat down, tried to keep my eyes on a single point. It was impossible. Every time I focused, new shapes emerged in the periphery, longer, darker, harder to define. I could feel them, though, soft steps, too light for shoes, brushing the edges of the carpet, rustling like paper or dry leaves. But I had not moved. The shadows weren't just behind the furniture. They crept along the walls, melting into corners I had thought empty. Each one stretched a little further, as if the room itself was shifting, expanding in subtle ways. A single curtain stirred. I didn't touch it. The movement was too precise, deliberate. The darkness behind it thickened, dense and patient. I tried speaking once. My voice cracked, a thin thread of sound that faded instantly. No answer came, only a pressure in the air, as if the silence was pressing back. I could feel my pulse echoing in my ears, slow, heavy, like it might betray me. Every time I turned my head, a corner was different. The shadows were no longer static. They shifted with intent. I wanted to run, but the floor felt wrong, cold, sticky, reluctant under my bare feet. It was as if each step made the shadows smile, stretching their forms just out of reach. The shapes multiplied again, not in number only, but in depth, thicker, longer, darker than any absence of light should allow. A pattern began to form, though I could not see it clearly. A geometry of fear, quiet but absolute. And then I realized I wasn't alone, not in the sense of a person, but in the awareness that something was watching, coordinating the movement of the shadows, guiding them to occupy every corner I could see. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to keep the room between me and the darkness, but it had no respect for distance. Edges blurred, corners folded in on themselves, and I felt my own shadow trembling. A soft, barely their scraping followed me as I crawled to the bed. I pressed my face into the mattress. Even there, I could feel the edges of darkness brushing against me, patient, unhurried. The room held its breath. I could hear the subtle stretching of the shadows across the floor, a quiet, creeping expansion that would not stop. And then nothing, not the scraping, not the movement, not the hum of the heater, only the pale light through the blinds and the sense that the shadows were still waiting, in corners I could no longer see. I didn't move. I didn't dare. And I hoped, quietly, that morning would come. The hallway stretched before me, pale light spilling from a cracked bulb overhead. I stepped in, and the floor groaned beneath my weight, a tired sound that faded too quickly. Silence pressed against my ears. Somewhere, far away, a metallic clang echoed. I turned, thinking it came from behind me. Nothing, just walls. The faint smell of damp paint clung to the corners. The air felt heavy, thick, almost breathing. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet, a slow, stubborn thrum. And then a rustling, soft, deliberate, like fabric shifting in the dark. I froze. Light pooled on the worn carpet, edges fraying like brittle leaves. A shadow moved against the wall, or maybe it was a flicker from the bulb. The hair on my arms prickled. I couldn't tell if the sound had followed me or come from further down. I took a step forward. The floor whispered under my feet. The wall seemed to lean closer, closing in, and the hum of the building filled my chest. A faint odor of smoke lingered, sour and unfamiliar, as though someone had been here long ago. Another noise, soft footsteps, maybe. No, not footsteps, more like scratching. A fingernail dragging across wood. I held my breath. It stopped when I did. I wanted to move faster, but my legs were lead, heavy with a cold that wasn't just the air. The corridor twisted. Each turn looked the same. The pale light caught the edge of something, a corner where shadow pooled like water. I leaned closer, and the air tasted of rust. Something waited there, a presence without shape. It didn't make a sound, yet the silence screamed around me. I remembered the door at the far end. I tried to focus on that. The handle looked dull, corroded, as though it hadn't been touched in years. My hand hovered above it, trembling slightly. The building seemed to exhale around me. A whisper curled at the edge of my hearing. I couldn't understand it. Or maybe I didn't want to. It was just a breath, almost swallowed by the hallway, then gone. The bulb above flickered again. For a heartbeat, the hallway vanished into darkness. When the light returned, the shadows had shifted. Closer now, waiting. I took another step. The carpet felt sticky underfoot, though I didn't see anything. Every movement stirred the air, and the air smelled of cold metal and wet earth. I felt it watching. Silent, patient. I stopped halfway down the hall. The silence became a weight pressing on my chest. I could feel the hum in my bones, the static at the edge of vision. Something moved behind me. I was sure of it, though nothing was there. The space behind me felt different. Thicker, older. I forced my eyes to the far door. It looked impossibly far, though I knew it couldn't be. My skin prickled, my hair standing on end, and still I moved. Slowly, carefully, as though moving too fast would wake it fully. A door creaked, far to the left. I swallowed hard. The sound was alone in the hallway. Echoed once, twice, then nothing. The quiet returned, deeper now, denser. I reached the door at last. My fingers brushed the handle. Cold metal bit into my skin. I paused. A shiver ran from my shoulders to my spine. Behind me, I felt the air stir. No footsteps. No whisper. Just movement. A brush against the walls, soft and deliberate. I didn't turn. The handle turned under my fingers, stiff but willing. I pushed the door open. A breath of warmer air met me, scented with dust and something faintly sweet, like decayed flowers. The hallway behind me remained silent, still, waiting. I stepped through. The door closed slowly, almost on its own. I didn't look back. The corridor was empty, yet I could still feel it there. The hush, the faint hum beneath the walls, the shadows curling along the floor. I could hear nothing but my own shallow breathing. And yet, the silence followed me. For hours, I walked. The memory of the hallway clung like fog. Its emptiness, its quiet insistence. The weight waited. Even now, I can feel it. The hallway's silence. It never truly lets go. The night was thick with fog, curling around the edges of the street like smoke. I leaned against a cracked window pane, feeling the cold seep into my fingers. Outside, the neon sign pulsed, a rhythm that seemed alive, almost breathing. Its light cut across the room in thin, flickering stripes. Each pulse painted the corners of the walls with shadows that stretched and recoiled. I watched, unable to look away. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and something metallic, old. A soft hum hummed in my ears, matching the neon's pulse. It felt almost like it was calling, coaxing, drawing attention to something I couldn't name. I heard a creak behind me. The floorboards remembered every step I'd taken tonight. I turned slowly, expecting nothing, but the shadows had shifted. They weren't just on the walls anymore. The sign outside blinked again, brighter this time. I could see the dust in the air, glittering like tiny sparks, moving with the rhythm. Each pulse seemed to drag the shadows closer to me, stretching them over my skin. I wanted to step back, but the carpet was cold under my feet. A faint scent of burnt plastic hung near the window. It made my throat tight, my eyes water. I imagined the shapes in the corners forming faces. Eyes that glimmered just like the neon, cold, pale, observing. I blinked. They were gone, or maybe hiding. The hum became a whisper, almost indistinct, curling around the room. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. It was soft like a warning, like something just beyond comprehension. Outside, the neon flickered faster now. It cast the walls in a strobe of red and blue, like an anxious heartbeat. Each flash revealed something that wasn't there the moment before. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the pulse of the light vibrate through the pane. It was almost like touching a living thing, a faint warmth, but not comforting. I could hear my own breath, sharp and uneven. It mingled with the whisper, with the hum, with the pulse. The room was alive in its own way, or maybe it always had been, and I was only noticing now. The neon blinked once more, and the shadows recoiled, as if startled. Then it dimmed slightly, a pause in the rhythm. In that moment, silence pressed against my ears. I waited for what I didn't know, but I felt it move just beyond the edge of the room, brushing against the corners of perception. The light returned slowly, softer now, almost hesitant. I felt the pulse in my chest sync with it, slow, measured. The shadows melted back into the corners. The hum lingered, faint, like a memory of a song half remembered. I breathed in, tasting the metallic air, feeling it slide down my throat. I leaned back from the window, letting the fog blur the neon into nothing more than a smear of color. The night outside remained thick and quiet. I could still hear it, though, the pulse, the hum, the whisper, just beneath the skin, and I knew it would be back. The neon would flicker again, and I would be waiting, alone, listening. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and something older buried beneath the floorboards. Outside, the night hung low and quiet, though the wind whispered against the glass. I lay down, the mattress sighing beneath me, not with comfort. Something else, a subtle pull, a shift I couldn't see. The bed moved again, just a fraction, as if testing my weight. I tried to hold still, my hand pressed against the sheets, feeling the fabric tremble. It was slow, almost polite, almost patient. A draft skimmed my neck, carrying the scent of wet leaves. The darkness seemed thicker near the corners, pooling in the edges where the moonlight barely touched. I focused on my breathing, counting each inhale, each exhale. But the bed remembered me differently. A crease formed beneath my shoulder. I felt it sink, like the mattress had softened and hardened at the same time. A whisper of movement, unseen, crawling beneath the blankets. My heart matched it, uneven, hesitant. I tried to lift my arm. It barely rose. The mattress didn't push back. It held me in place. But the weight wasn't entirely mine. I told myself it was nerves, that I was imagining the pressure, the subtle shifts, the quiet resistance. Yet every time I moved slightly, the bed mirrored me. Not perfectly, not exactly. The window rattled, a single pane vibrating in the pale light. Outside, the wind carried a faint rustling, like distant footsteps over dry leaves. Inside, the floorboards were still, but the bed hummed beneath me, a soft vibration, persistent. I pressed my cheek to the pillow. The fabric was cool, almost wet against my skin. And then, just beneath my ribs, a tiny tremor, a shift so small I could have blamed it on the sheets or the springs. But I knew it wasn't mine. The ceiling fan moved above me, slicing shadows across the wall. They stretched, reached, retreated. I could smell the faint tang of iron, maybe blood, maybe just a rust from the old hinge. The bed tilted ever so slightly. I didn't lift my head. I couldn't. A long silence followed. Not emptiness. Something waiting. Watching. Even in the stillness, the mattress seemed alive, coiled beneath me. I wanted to speak, to call it out, to tell it to stop. But the words wouldn't form. The weight of the air, thick and humid, pressed against my throat. Even my thoughts felt sluggish. Another tremor. The bed sank slightly, then rose like a slow wave. I could feel it, not just under me, but around me. The blankets whispered as they shifted. A chill ran down my spine. I reached for the edge of the bed. My fingers found only empty space. No one was there, yet the resistance followed me, curling around my wrist, light but insistent. Time didn't pass in the usual way. The clock ticked. Somewhere, though the sound seemed swallowed by the quiet, the mattress moved with each shallow breath, each heartbeat, each thought. Finally, I lay still, not resisting, not yielding, just listening. To the soft, subtle hum beneath me, to the shadows curling along the walls, to the restless weight that refused to leave. Eventually, my eyes closed. The bed didn't stop shifting. It never did. I felt it even as I drifted somewhere between waking and forgetting. And I realized, in that fragile half-darkness, I was not alone. The air was thick with fog that night. I walked along the narrow path behind the house. The grass wet against my shoes. A pale light from the street lamps barely touched the edges of the trees. leaving shadows that trembled with each breeze. I paused. The wind carried a faint rustling, almost like soft footsteps trailing behind me. But when I turned, nothing was there. The whisper came first as a shiver along my neck. Not in the air, not in the room, but inside my head, curling around my thoughts. It was too quiet to catch fully. Just a breath. A syllable that vanished before it could form. I tried to shake it off. The fog pressed closer, cold and damp against my skin. I could taste it on my lips, metallic and sharp, like the night itself was bleeding. I kept moving. The whisper came again, nearer this time. It curved around my ear. I thought I caught it. Words. Something I should have remembered. But when I tried, they melted, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. The leaves rustled, not with wind, but with something deliberate. A pause. A hush so complete it felt heavy in my ears. I stopped walking. The earth beneath me was soft, spongy with moisture. Each breath I drew trembled in the cold. And then the whisper returned, longer, curling across my thoughts, threading through the shadows. I wanted to turn to face it, but my body refused. A fear so deep it felt like gravity had shifted, rooting me to the spot. The fog wrapped tighter, smelling faintly of rain and old soil. I heard it again. Not words I could recall, just shapes, sound fragments. A hum, low and steady, vibrating through my chest, coaxing something awake inside me. I tried to focus on the path, the narrow strip of light, the wet leaves glistening pale silver. But every step forward felt heavier, as if the night itself resisted my movement. And then the silence hit, thick and absolute. I could hear my heartbeat, slow, cautious, each thump a warning. The whisper was gone, yet lingered, like smoke clinging to a memory I couldn't touch. I pressed my hand to my ear. Nothing. And yet, when I closed my eyes, I could feel the words curling there, just beyond comprehension. I walked back toward the house. The fog was thinning, but the shadows remained, stretching longer than the street lamp should allow. Each window I passed seemed to breathe, pale light quivering like shallow lungs. Inside, the air was warmer, almost safe. I moved through the hallway, my steps silent on the wooden floor. The whisper brushed my mind one last time. It was almost tender, almost intimate, and then it stopped. I climbed the stairs slowly. The hum of the house felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. In my room, I closed the door. The world outside receded into shadow and fog. I lay down. The sheets smelled faintly of laundry soap and cold air, grounding me. I tried to recall the words, to grasp the whisper, but it had slipped beyond reach. All that remained was a hollow, lingering unease, a quiet tremor under my skin. I drifted. Dreams blurred the edges of reality. Shapes moved just beyond the corners of my vision, pale and shifting. The whisper visited there too. Not loud, not threatening, just aware. I woke to morning light, filtering through the curtains. The air was warmer now, soft with sun. But a part of me still felt the shadow of that whisper clinging to my ear. I tried to remember. I wanted to write it down. But the words had vanished. All that remained was the echo, and a fear I could not name. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and old paper. Outside, the wind pressed against the panes, dragging leaves in slow spirals across the porch. It was late, later than I thought, though I couldn't say for certain how late. I noticed the door first because the light changed. A pale glow filtered around its edges, thin and hesitant. Then the shadows, figures, waiting. I couldn't see faces, just outlines dark and still. They didn't move, not a shift of foot, not a twitch of a hand. Just there, the air felt heavier, thicker with each shallow breath. My pulse hummed in my ears, mingling with the creak of the old floorboards beneath me. I wanted to tell myself it was imagination. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, a shadow left by the moon scraping through the blinds. But they were too solid, too patient. They pressed against the doorway, without pressing at all. I tried to blink the image away, but it clung to my eyes. The smallest movement, a curtain flutter, a crack in the old wood, made it seem like they shifted slightly. Not toward me, not away, just aware. I could feel the cold brushing along my arms, though the window was closed. The smell of something wet and earthy seeped from the corners of the room, rising slowly, curling around my ankles. I sat, almost on instinct, trying to make myself small, hopelessly small. A soft rustle, like fabric against fabric, came from the doorway. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I could hear my own teeth grinding together in some attempt at soundless defiance. One figure leaned, or maybe the light shifted. My eyes weren't sure, and the space between them grew smaller, though I hadn't taken a step. I tried to remember how the air felt before they came, before the hum settled low in my chest. It had been easier then, lighter. The shadows didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence spoke for them, and it spoke of waiting, of watching, of patience that stretched longer than the night itself. A subtle shift in the floorboards behind me, or maybe it was in front. I couldn't tell anymore. The figures didn't move, yet the room breathed around them. I reached for the door, thinking I could make a noise, a knock, a step. But my hand hovered. The air pressed against my skin, colder now, damp with subtle decay I couldn't name. I couldn't open the door. Not really. And yet, I knew they were aware of every inch I moved, every shallow inhale, every pulse of fear, quiet but insistently loud. I thought of leaving, slipping into the hall, running to the street, but the hall seemed darker than the room. Empty, yes, but waiting. Every corridor felt like a corridor I had walked before, though I knew I hadn't. The figures didn't vanish. They didn't change, just stayed, not pressing forward, not leaving. I settled back against the wall, trying to convince myself to breathe, to slow the pulse, to exist in some sense of safety, even as every sense told me otherwise. The wind outside faded, leaving a low, persistent hum. The moonlight shifted through the blinds, casting pale stripes across their forms. I couldn't stop looking. Couldn't stop feeling the space between a stretch, a space that smelled of damp wood, rust, and the faintest trace of something human. Eventually, I let my eyes close, not in sleep, not in surrender, but in the small, soft hope that closing them might make the shadows less defined, less patient. I kept them there, waiting. I stayed, alone with the figures at the door, and somewhere between the hum and the breath, I realized they'd always been there, always waiting, always still, and I would never know if the room was theirs, or if it had been mine all along. The fog had settled thick over the town. Morning light was pale, filtered through the mist, soft enough to make shapes blur. The room felt colder than it should, though the heater hummed low. I sat on the edge of the bed. Shadows from last night were gone, yet the air seemed to carry their weight, invisible but heavy. The walls were bare, empty. Still, I felt watched, though no eyes met mine. A faint smell of damp wood lingered, and the mattress spring-side under me. Every breath I drew seemed louder than it had any right to be. The window rattled lightly, as though something brushed against the glass outside. I pressed my palms to the sill. Cold, nothing else. I remembered the shapes that had moved here yesterday. The quiet rustle behind the curtains, the soft footsteps that paused just beyond the hallway. Now, the hallways were quiet, too quiet, the silence pressing around me. I tried to think, to fill the space with reason, but memory has its own gravity. The faint echo of presence lingered, like a song half-remembered. Just at the edge of hearing, a chair creaked somewhere down the hall. I didn't move, couldn't move. It was both relief and fear, knowing nothing would appear if I did. I ran my fingers along the floorboards. Dust clung to my skin, soft and stubborn. The smell of old wood and something faintly metallic hovered. The fog outside made the room feel smaller. Shutters rattled in rhythm with the wind. I could almost imagine the shapes returning, their presence brushing against my legs like cold cloth. But they didn't. They never did again. The sunlight grew stronger, pale and hesitant, casting the room in muted gold. It revealed every corner. Empty. Still, I stood by the doorway. The floorboards groaned underfoot, and I waited for a sound that never came. The hum of the heater, the faint whistle of wind, and the memory of movement were all that remained. I closed my eyes for a moment, breath slow, measured. The weight of unseen eyes lifted just slightly. I felt myself alone, but not lonely. The fog outside began to thin. Shapes of trees, rooftops, and distant hills emerged, soft and blurred by the lingering mist. The world felt both new and hollow. I touched the window again, cold pressed into my palms. I could see my own reflection, pale and still. I could almost feel him behind me, and yet nothing. A final shiver ran down my spine. I accepted it. The emptiness, the silence, the faint memory of what had been. The morning lingered, soft and patient, and I walked through the room, each step careful, each breath a quiet claim of being. The fog would lift, shadows would vanish, and still I would carry the memory with me, like a soft echo in a silent house.